So, this is the fourth video of the series that we at Ideas have been doing on GLC. Joining me, Ali Iskandar, I'm the guy who hosts all the videos and do all the video production, is Zulaika.
Hi, I'm Zu, Research Assistant at Ideas.
And Lau.
Hi, friends of Ideas. My name is Lau Tento, Research Manager here at Ideas.
Yeah. They're the researchers under the Economics and Business units here at Ideas. They've been helping me out with all the research on all the scripts. I've just been helping in producing them. And they've been doing tremendous work. And they just released a report just recently. So we promised that we would talk about the Ideas research, but we thought that maybe it's just better and more interesting to do a discussion on GLC as a whole, on like maybe the current issues as well. So whatever it is, then hopefully you enjoy it. So first I want to ask, like, why did you guys have this idea to make videos in the first place?
So usually we'll do research and then we'll publish a report. But we realized that there's a certain audience who read reports, and there's also other people who might be interested about GLCs and who GLCs do affect them too, but they don't really know much. So we produced this video and also infographics just for them. So for them to know more, and also so we can know what they think about it. So it's basically like an introduction video. So it's not gonna be deep analysis like the reports, but in simple format.
I think it's a totally great idea myself, because like when I first got into this project with you guys, I really don't know much about GLCs. I mean, I kind of, you kind of hear the stories here and there about GLCs, but I didn't realize how complex the world is actually, and like how deep it actually goes. And you guys just recently released a report. Can you tell me about it?
Yes, sure. We started our research agenda looking at who owns and who controls the GLCs. That led to a paper on GLIC, where we highlighted the broad ownership pattern by the government. Right now, we are entering into the governance discussion, and we look at a separate entity called the statutory body. Now, they are different from GLC and GLICs. They are incorporated differently. GLC is incorporated under the Company Act, which makes them no different from another privately owned company, whereas statutory body is incorporated under a different act. I'll give you a few examples of statutory bodies. For example, if you look at Ministry of Rural Development, they all report to ministers. So under the Ministry of Rural Development, there you find Mara, you find Felda, you find Kejora, which is a Johor state as developmental statutory body. And then under, if you look at the Ministry of Education, there you find PTPTN. We all know PTPTN very well. So they are different in addition to who controls them. Statutory bodies are wholly owned by the government, but also their mandate. I think GLCs, like it or not, they are subject to market forces. So profit maximization has to play a role. Whereas for statutory bodies, they do not directly have to face the market, and their focus is more on socio-economic advancement. We feel it is timely to talk about the governance of statutory bodies now, given the recent spate of political appointments to GLCs and also statutory bodies. And we are of the view that statutory bodies is relatively less understood and less researched. Therefore, we are really taking baby steps to understand how to govern our statutory bodies.
Yeah, this seems like a pretty complex issue. I mean, like all this political leanings, like inspiring all this work. Is this like your next step to where your GLC project is heading?
I think so. I think governance will play an increasing role. I think because now that it's a fact that you now have a lot of politicians sitting in the boards of GLCs, statutory bodies. There's also government departments and also yayasan, charitable bodies. But more so for statutory bodies, because they are not as market facing as the GLCs, because for GLCs, you'll know if you're performing okay or not because the market will give you a signal, especially if you are publicly listed. The investors will tell you whether or not you are doing a great job just by looking at the share prices. You have a bit of inkling, I think, and market data, market forces will discipline the management team for GLCs, and of course they are regulated by the Securities Commission and also Bossa Malaysia. But for statutory bodies, I think the governance picture is less clear. I think we feel like the Parliament has a big role to play in terms of checks and balance, but we also know that the capacity of members of Parliament is quite restricted. And if they do not have a strong check and balance mechanism, then we might have serious concerns, I think, with the performance of statutory bodies, and also the way the governance structure is currently put in place for our statutory bodies, where the minister is given a lot of power, not just to appoint who sits at the board of these different statutory bodies, but also the duties, the direction of these statutory bodies, and ultimately how do you evaluate the success or performance of these statutory bodies. When we were doing the research report on the governance of statutory bodies, we were caught by surprise really, because some of these audited statements, some of these annual report, the more recent one is not available. Some of them, the earliest one is probably 2017, which means you do not know what happened in the past 2 years. So that can't be a good sign of strong governance. That is the reason why I think we would want to spend a bit more time to understand how can we improve governance of statutory bodies.
I find it still kind of hard to wrap my head around it. Like, what exactly is the problem with the statutory bodies?
So basically, it's unclear. So, like, we know they have a mandate, but some of them were like MARA is 19.
Yeah, the MARA Act was incorporated in 1966.
Yeah. So 1966, and then till now they're still using the same act. It's not clear, like, so they have a lot of subsidiary companies, and what are they actually doing, like in statutory bodies? Because even in annual reports, like some, like Lang mentioned, some of it is not out. So like, what did they do? Like, what are their mandates?
Right. There's a lot of vagueness basically.
Right? Yeah, and it goes back also to the very debates about the role of government in the economy, because as you can imagine, we have historical pathway leading to where we are today. If you can imagine the transfer of assets from colonial powers then to the hands of the nation leaders. Many of these statutory bodies were created quite early on in the history of this country. Some of them were even before independence. They usually have mandate that addresses the socio-economic situation of the economy at that time, the rural community, the Bumiputera community. But what happened over the years, we realized is that statutory bodies, they start to create a lot of subsidiary GLCs, which means that they are getting into commercialization. In our report, we raised the point of, for example, MARA, who was first created to help spur industrial development, entrepreneurship amongst the Bumiputera community. But over the years, they created a lot of subsidiary companies which they own wholly, which makes them GLCs, right? And funny enough, some of these companies are created in tax havens, right? Which inevitably raises concerns of governance. And look at where some of these companies are making their investments. They are buying properties in foreign countries, like maybe in Australia and also in UK. Some of these investments, it would be hard pressed to justify how does it lead to the entrepreneurship development of the Bumiputera community.
Okay, GLC is this very big thing, right? I want to see it like to where GLC is in the current time. So at this time of recording, we're having this pandemic called COVID-19. Maybe you guys have heard of it. It's pretty bad. But having GLCs around have proven that it's actually quite helpful with the economy. Don't you think all these GLCs are helping? Maybe they should just stay here then, at least?
Yeah, I mean, the textbook answer to that question is obviously when government has a presence in the economy, they tend to compete with private competitors, I think, on resources like labor, capital. But of course, we don't really live in a textbook kind of a world with that kind of assumption. We learned a lot, I think, throughout the COVID-19 pandemic period. We saw how the GLC, or if I can use the phrase government ecosystem, which includes also the government departments, GLCs, how they can help in trying to absorb the cost or absorb the shock that the crisis has caused to businesses and to people. We are dealing with high unemployment, highest I think in 30 years at this time of recording. Had it not because of GLCs or GLCs and government's influence and support through these different vehicles, we might witness an even worse outcome, I think, economically speaking. But we also struggle at the same time because there's enough evidence out there that suggests the repercussion of having strong government presence in the private economy, the kind of incentives that they will create. Private entrepreneurs are discouraged, I think, from entering into certain industries or businesses where there's a huge presence of government. Private investors from outside this country as well, they'll be looking at this country and say, where is the source of growth, the impetus for growth if the government holds a huge sway, I think, in the way economies run. But equally, there's also a rising commentary and recently more and more research into this area where they are asking the question whether or not SOEs, really the state-owned enterprises, which is a phrase that is used more broadly, I think, in the world, the kind of role that they can help play to develop an economy. After all, Malaysia is a mixed economy, and SOEs, GLCs, they are going to play a big role in our economy, in our politics. Maybe scaling it down or divesting might not be the silver bullet, I think, to solving all the problems here. But how do you govern them so that the interests of the senior managers and the people can be better aligned?
So what are you basically saying? Can you just simplify it exactly?
So I guess basically in hard times like this during COVID-19, it's good to have GLC because it's an alternative tool for the government to disburse help and to stimulate the economy. But when we're recovered in normal times, in good times, then the presence of GLC may have other repercussions. For example, Lau mentioned competing with private sectors, private companies. So there's like two sides of it. It's good during the hard times, but also in the good times, we don't really want it to be there. So what do we do moving forward with it? Yeah.
Right. So this sounds like a very hard balance of GLC in the private side.
Ideally, you would want the government to continue to have presence in industries where private owners are not ready to be filling the market gap. I think this has usually got to do with riskier investment in technology as well, where the benefit is not clear at the point of R&D and idea conceptualization. But for industries that are quite mature, where you have a lot of private firms competing already, then maybe there is a case for government to scale it down its presence. But you want to think about how to do this more in a transparent and effective manner. We do not want to be in a situation where there's a collapse in GLCs overnight. And can you imagine the kind of shock that it will introduce to the economy? Neither do we want to see the transfer of assets, right? From the shares, the government will pare down its shares in the GLCs, and it ended up in the hands of tycoons, or hands of a small group of elites, I think. So there is a lot of points of consideration that we have to take more seriously. I think moving forward, we will be looking at what OECD is saying, for example, the best practices on government ownership. We will try to understand how we can adapt some of these best practices in the Malaysian context.
This is a very good discussion. Fortunately, we don't really have that much time, so maybe you guys can give me some closing thoughts about where you think this project is going. I mean, like, we're coming to a close to this project specifically, so I'm sure you mentioned a little bit that we have the next step. So
Yeah, so for this series of videos that we plan for GLC, this is like the end already, but we still think there's a lot of things about GLC that we haven't mentioned, and we think it's important to mention, for example, governance. And so we will definitely be coming out with more videos. Just talk more about GLCs, like about governance and other issues that we think are important.
Yeah, and I think we should continue doing videos such as this, and we'll be engaging with the audience through infographics and social media, because we want it to be a discussion with the nation. I think we want it to be a discussion with the people on the ground. Yes, from time to time we have discussion with stakeholders like owners of GLCs, with government, with central bank. That's all fine and dandy, but we want to know what the people really feel about GLCs, because if you want to talk about reform of any kind, there has to be a broad consensus, I think, and that is what we aspire to do.
sounds good. Well, speaking about talking to the people, there are some questions here, but we'll address them on another video. So for now, we'll just end it here because we are short on time. So thank you for both of your time.
Thank you.
Really. Okay.